Story 113 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Kurt from Tucson, Arizona. Household Tales by Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm, and translated by Margaret Hunt. The Two Kings' Children. There was once on a time a king who had a little boy of whom it had been foretold that he should be killed by a stag when he was 16 years of age, and when he had reached that age the huntsmen once went hunting with him. In the forest the king's son was separated from the others, and all at once he saw a great stag, which he wanted to shoot, but could not hit. At length he chased the stags so far that they were quite out of the forest, and then suddenly a great tall man was standing there instead of the stag, and said, "It is well that I have thee. I have already ruined 6 pairs of glass gates with running after thee, and have not been able to get thee." Then he took the king's son with him, and dragged him through a great lake to a great palace, and then he had to sit down to table with him, and eat something. When they had eaten something together, the king said, "I have 3 daughters. Thou must keep watch over the eldest for one night, from 9 in the evening till 6 in the morning, and every time the clock strikes, I will come myself and call, and if thou then givest me no answer tomorrow morning, thou shalt be put to death, but if thou always givest me an answer, thou shalt have her to wife." When the young folks went to the bedroom, there stood a stone image of Saint Christopher, and the king's daughter said to it, "My father will come at 9 o'clock, and every hour till it strikes 3. When he calls, give him an answer instead of the king's son." Then the stone image of Saint Christopher nodded its head quite quickly, and then more and more slowly, until at last it stood still. The next morning the king said to him, "Thou hast done the business well, but I cannot give my daughter away. Thou must now watch a night by my second daughter, and then I will consider with myself whether thou canst have my eldest daughter to wife. But I shall come every hour myself, and when I call thee, answer me, and if I call thee and thou dost not reply, thy blood shall flow." Then they both went into the sleeping room, and there stood a still larger stone image of Saint Christopher, and the king's daughter said to it, "If my father calls, do you answer him." Then the great stone image of Saint Christopher again nodded its head quite quickly, and then more and more slowly, until at last it stood still again. And the king's son lay down on the threshold, put his hand under his head, and slept. The next morning the king said to him, "Thou hast done the business really well, but I cannot give my daughter away. Thou must now watch a night by the youngest princess, and then I will consider with myself whether thou canst have my second daughter to wife. But I shall come every hour myself, and when I call thee, answer me, and if I call thee and thou answerest not, thy blood shall flow for me." Then they once more went to the sleeping room together, and there was a much greater and much taller image of Saint Christopher than the 2 first had been. The king's daughter said to it, "When my father calls, do thou answer." Then the great tall stone image of Saint Christopher nodded quite half an hour with its head, until at length the head stood still again. And the king's son laid himself down on the threshold of the door and slept. The next morning the king said, "Thou hast indeed watched well, but I cannot give thee my daughter now. I have a great forest. If thou cuttest it down for me between 6 o'clock this morning and 6 at night, I will think about it." Then he gave him a glass axe, a glass wedge, and a glass mallet. When he got into the wood, he began at once to cut, but the axe broke in 2. Then he took the wedge and struck it once with the mallet, and it became as short and as small as sand. Then he was much troubled, and believed he would have to die, and sat down and wept. Now when it was noon, the king said, "One of you girls must take him something to eat." "No," said the two eldest, "we will not take it to him. The one by whom he last watched can take him something." Then the youngest was forced to go and take him something to eat. When she got into the forest, she asked him how he was getting on. "Oh," said he, "I am getting on very badly." Then she said he was to come and just eat a little. "Nay," said he, "I cannot do that, I shall still have to die, so I will eat no more." Then she spoke so kindly to him, and begged him just to try, that he came and ate something. When he had eaten something, she said, "I will comb thy hair a while, and then thou wilt feel happier." So she combed his hair, and he became weary and fell asleep. And then she took her handkerchief and made a knot in it, and struck it 3 times on the earth, and said, "Earth workers, come forth." In a moment numbers of little earthmen came forth, and asked what the king's daughter commanded. Then said she, "In 3 hours' time the great forest must be cut down, and the whole of the wood laid in heaps." So the little earthmen went about and got together the whole of their kindred to help them with the work. They began at once, and when the 3 hours were over, all was done, and they came back to the king's daughter and told her so. Then she took her white handkerchief again and said, "Earth workers, go home." On this they all disappeared. When the king's son awoke, he was delighted, and she said, "Come home when it has struck 6 o'clock." He did as she told him, and then the king asked, "Hast thou made away with the forest?" "Yes," said the king's son. When they were sitting at table, the king said, "I cannot yet give thee my daughter to wife, thou must still do something more for her sake." So he asked what was it to be then? "I have a great fish pond," said the king. "Thou must go to it tomorrow morning, and clear it of all mud until it is as bright as a mirror, and fill it with every kind of fish." The next morning the king gave him a glass shovel, and said, "The fish pond must be done by 6 o'clock." So he went away, and when he came to the fish pond, he stuck his shovel in the mud and broke it in 2. Then he stuck his hoe in the mud and broke it also. Then he was much troubled. At noon the youngest daughter brought him something to eat, and asked him how he was getting on. So the king's son said everything was going very ill with him, and he would certainly have to lose his head. "My tools have broken to pieces again." "Oh," said she, "thou must just come and eat something, and then thou wilt be in another frame of mind." "No," said he, "I cannot eat, I am far too unhappy for that." Then she gave him many good words, until at last he came and ate something. Then she combed his hair again, and he fell asleep, so once more she took her handkerchief, tied a knot in it, and struck the ground thrice with the knot, and said, "Earth workers, come forth." In a moment a great many little earthmen came, and asked what she desired, and she told them that in 3 hours' time they must have the fish pond entirely cleaned out, and it must be so clear that people could see themselves reflected in it, and every kind of fish must be in it. The little earthmen went away and summoned all their kindred to help them, and in 2 hours it was done. Then they returned to her and said, "We have done as thou hast commanded." The king's daughter took the handkerchief, and once more struck thrice on the ground with it, and said, "Earth workers, go home again." Then they all went away. When the king's son awoke, the fish pond was done. Then the king's daughter went away also, and told him that when it was 6, he was to come to the house. When he arrived at the house, the king asked, "Hast thou got the fish pond done?" "Yes," said the king's son. "That was very good." When they were again sitting at table, the king said, "Thou hast certainly done the fish pond, but I cannot give thee my daughter yet. Thou must just do one thing more." "What is that then?" asked the king's son. The king said he had a great mountain. on which there was nothing but briars, which must all be cut down, and at the top of it the youth must build up a great castle, which must be as strong as could be conceived, and all the furniture and fittings belonging to a castle must be inside it. And when he arose the next morning, the king gave him a glass axe and a glass gimlet with him, and he was to have all done by 6 o'clock. As he was cutting down the first briar with the axe, it broke off short, and so small that the pieces flew all round about, and he could not use the gimlet either. Then he was quite miserable, and waited for his dearest to see if she would not come and help him in his need. When it was midday, she came and brought him something to eat. He went to meet her, and told her all, and ate something, and let her comb his hair, and fell asleep. Then she once more took the knot, and struck the earth with it, and said, "Earth workers, come forth." Then came once again numbers of earthmen, and asked what her desire was. Then said she, in the space of 3 hours they must cut down the whole of the briars, and a castle must be built on top of the mountain that must be as strong as anyone could conceive, and all the furniture that pertains to a castle must be inside it. They went away, and summoned their kindred to help them, and when the time was come, all was ready. Then they came to the king's daughter, and told her so, and the king's daughter took her handkerchief, and struck thrice on the earth with it, and said, "Earth workers, go home," on which they all disappeared. When therefore the king's son awoke, and saw everything done, he was as happy as a bird in the air. When it had struck 6, they went home together. Then said the king, "Is the castle ready?" "Yes," said the king's son. When they sat down to table, the king said, "I cannot give away my youngest daughter until the 2 eldest are married." Then the king's son and the king's daughter were quite troubled, and the king's son had no idea what to do. But he went by night to the king's daughter, and ran away with her. When they had got a little distance away, the king's daughter peeped round and saw her father behind her. "Oh," said she, "what are we to do? My father is behind us, and will take us back with him. I will at once change thee into a briar, and myself into a rose, and I will shelter myself in the midst of the bush." When the father reached the place, there stood a briar with 1 rose on it. Then he was about to gather the rose, when the thorn came and pricked his finger, so that he was forced to go home again. His wife asked why he had not brought their daughter back with him. So he said he had nearly got up to her, but that all at once he had lost sight of her, and a briar with 1 rose was growing on the spot. Then said the queen, "If thou hadst but gathered the rose, the briar would have been forced to come too." So he went back again to fetch the rose, but in the meantime the 2 were already far over the plain, and the king ran after them. Then the daughter once more looked round and saw her father coming, and said, "Oh, what shall we do now? I will instantly change thee into a church, and myself into a priest, and I will stand up in the pulpit and preach." When the king got to the place, there stood a church, and in the pulpit was a priest preaching. So he listened to the sermon, and then went home again. Then the queen asked why he had not brought their daughter with him, and he said, "Nay, I ran a long time after her, and just as I thought I should soon overtake her, a church was standing there, and a priest was in the pulpit preaching." "Thou shouldst just have brought the priest," said his wife, "and then the church would soon have come. It is no use to send thee, I must go there myself." When she had walked for some time, and could see the 2 in the distance, the king's daughter peeped round and saw her mother coming, and said, "Now we are undone, for my mother is coming herself. I will immediately change thee into a fish pond, and myself into a fish." When the mother came to the place, there was a large fish pond, and in the midst of it a fish was leaping about and peeping out of the water, and it was quite merry. She wanted to catch the fish, but she could not. Then she was very angry, and drank up the whole pond in order to catch the fish, but it made her so ill that she was forced to vomit, and vomited the whole pond out again. Then she cried, "I see very well that nothing can be done now," and said that now they might come back to her. Then the king's daughter went back again, and the queen gave her daughter 3 walnuts, and said, "With these thou canst help thyself when thou art in thy greatest need." So the young folks went once more away together, and when they had walked quite 10 miles, they arrived at the castle from whence the king's son came, and close by it was a village. When they reached it, the king's son said, "Stay here, my dearest. I will just go to the castle, and then I will come with a carriage and with attendants to fetch thee." When he got to the castle, they all rejoiced greatly at having the king's son back again, and he told them he had a bride who was now in the village, and they must go with the carriage to fetch her. Then they harnessed the horses at once, and many attendants seated themselves outside the carriage. When the king's son was about to get in, his mother gave him a kiss, and he forgot everything which had happened, and also what he was about to do. On this his mother ordered the horses to be taken out of the carriage again, and every one went back into the house. But the maiden sat in the village and watched, and thought he would come and fetch her, but no one came. Then the king's daughter took service in the mill which belonged to the castle, and was obliged to sit by the pond every afternoon and clean the tubs. And the queen came one day on foot from the castle, and went walking by the pond, and saw the well-grown maiden sitting there, and said, "What a fine, strong girl that is! She pleases me well." Then she and all with her looked at the maid, but no one knew her. So a long time passed by, during which the maiden served the miller honorably and faithfully. In the meantime the queen had sought a wife for her son, who came from quite a distant part of the world. When the bride came, they were at once to be married, and many people hurried together, all of whom wanted to see everything. Then the girl said to the miller that he might be so good as to give her leave to go also. So the miller said, "Yes, do go there." When she was about to go, she opened one of the 3 walnuts, and a beautiful dress lay inside it. She put it on and went into the church and stood by the altar. Suddenly came the bride and the bridegroom and seated themselves before the altar, and when the priest was just going to bless them, the bride peeped half round and saw the maiden standing there. Then she stood up again and said she would not be given away until she also had as beautiful a dress as that lady there. So they went back to the house again, and sent to ask the lady if she would sell that dress. No, she would not sell it, but the bride might perhaps earn it. Then the bride asked her how she was to do this. Then the maiden said if she might sleep one night outside the king's son's door, the bride might have what she wanted. So the bride said, yes, she was willing to do that. But the servants were ordered to give the king's son a sleeping drink, and then the maiden laid herself down on the threshold and lamented all night long. She had had the forest cut down for him, she had had the fish pond cleaned out for him, she had had the castle built for him, she had changed him into a briar, and then into a church, and at last into a fish pond, and yet he had forgotten her so quickly. The king's son did not hear one word of it, but the servants had been awakened, and had listened to it, and had not known what it could mean. The next morning, when they were all up, the bride put on the dress, and went away to the church with the bridegroom. In the meantime, the maiden opened the second walnut, and a still more beautiful dress was inside it. She put it on, and went and stood by the altar in the church, and everything happened as it had happened the time before. And the maiden again lay all night on the threshold which led to the chamber of the king's son, and the servant was once more to give him a sleeping drink. The servant, however, went to him and gave him something to keep him awake. And then the king's son went to bed, and the miller's maiden bemoaned herself as before on the threshold of the door, and told of all that she had done. All this the king's son heard, and was sore troubled, and what was past came back to him. Then he wanted to go to her, but his mother had locked the door. The next morning, however, he went at once to his beloved, and told her everything which had happened to him, and prayed her not to be angry with him for having forgotten her. Then the king's daughter opened the third walnut, and within it was a still more magnificent dress, which she put on, and went with her bridegroom to church, and numbers of children came, who gave them flowers and offered them gay ribbons to bind about their feet, and they were blessed by the priest, and had a merry wedding. But the false mother and the bride had to depart, and the mouth of the person who last told all this is still warm. End of story 113.
Story 114 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rocktie. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The Cunning Little Tailor. There was once on a time a princess who was extremely proud. If a wooer came, she gave him some riddle to guess, and if he could not find it out, he was sent contemptuously away. She let it be made known also that whosoever solved her riddle should marry her, let him be who he might. At length, therefore, 3 tailors fell in with each other, the 2 eldest of whom thought they had done so many dexterous bits of work successfully that they could not fail to succeed in this also. The 3rd was a little useless landloper, who did not even know his trade, but thought he must have some luck in this venture, for where else was it to come from? Then the 2 others said to him, "Just stay at home. Thou canst not do much with thy little bit of understanding." The little tailor, however, did not let himself be discouraged, and said he had set his head to work about this for once, and he would manage well enough, and he went forth as if the whole world were his. They all 3 announced themselves to the princess, and said she was to propound her riddle to them, and that the right persons were now come, who had understanding so fine that they could be threaded in a needle. Then said the princess, "I have 2 kinds of hair on my head. Of what color is it?" "If that be all," said the first, "it must be black and white, like the cloth which is called pepper and salt." The princess said, "Wrongly guessed. Let the second answer." Then said the second, "If it be not black and white, then it is brown and red, like my father's company coat." "Wrongly guessed," said the princess. "Let the third give the answer, for I see very well he knows it for certain." Then the little tailor stepped boldly forth and said, "The princess has a silver and a golden hair on her head, and those are the 2 different colors." When the princess heard that, she turned pale, and nearly fell down with terror, for the little tailor had guessed her riddle, and she had firmly believed that no man on earth could discover it. When her courage returned, she said, "Thou hast not won me yet by that. There is still something else that thou must do. Below in the stable is a bear, with which thou shalt pass the night, and when I get up in the morning, if thou art still alive, thou shalt marry me." She expected, however, she should thus get rid of the tailor, for the bear had never yet left anyone alive who had fallen into his clutches. The little tailor did not let himself be frightened away, but was quite delighted, and said, "Boldly ventured is half won." When therefore the evening came, our little tailor was taken down to the bear. The bear was about to set at the little fellow at once, and give him a hearty welcome with his paws. "Softly, softly," said the little tailor, "I will soon make thee quiet." Then quite composedly, and as if he had not an anxiety in the world, he took some nuts out of his pocket, cracked them, and ate the kernels. When the bear saw that, he was seized with the desire to have some nuts too. The tailor felt in his pockets and reached him a handful. They were, however, not nuts, but pebbles. The bear put them in his mouth, but could get nothing out of them, let him bite as he would. Thought he, what a stupid blockhead I am! I cannot even crack a nut. And then he said to the tailor, Here, crack me the nuts. There, see what a stupid fellow thou art, said the little tailor, to have such a great mouth and not be able to crack a small nut. Then he took the pebble and nimbly put a nut in his mouth in the place of it, and crack it was in two. I must try the thing again, said the bear. When I watch you, I then think I ought to be able to do it too. So the tailor once more gave him a pebble, and the bear tried and tried to bite into it with all the strength of his body. But no one will imagine that he accomplished it. When that was over, the tailor took out a violin from beneath his coat and played a piece of it to himself. When the bear heard the music, he could not help beginning to dance, and when he had danced a while, the thing pleased him so well that he said to the little tailor, Hark you, is the fiddle heavy? Light enough for a child. Look, with the left hand I lay my fingers on it, and with the right I stroke it with the bow, and then it goes merrily hop-sa-sa viva-la-lera. So, said the bear, fiddling is a thing I should like to understand too, that I might dance whenever I had a fancy. What dost thou think of that? Wilt thou give me lessons? With all my heart, said the tailor, if thou hast a talent for it. But just let me see thy claws. They are terribly long. I must cut thy nails a little. Then a vise was brought, and the bear put his claws in it, and the little tailor screwed it tight and said, Now wait until I come with the scissors. And he let the bear growl as he liked, and lay down in the corner on a bundle of straw and fell asleep. When the princess heard the bear growling so fiercely during the night, she believed nothing else but that he was growling for joy, and had made an end of the tailor. In the morning she arose careless and happy, but when she peeped into the stable, the tailor stood gaily before her, and was as healthy as a fish in water. Now she could not say another word against the wedding, because she had given a promise before everyone, and the king ordered a carriage to be brought, in which she was to drive to church with the tailor, and there she was to be married. When they had got into the carriage, the two other tailors, who had false hearts, and envied him his good fortune, went into the stable and unscrewed the bear again. The bear, in great fury, ran after the carriage. The princess heard him snorting and growling. She was terrified, and she cried, The bear is behind us, and wants to get thee. The tailor was quick and stood on his head, stuck his legs out of the window, and cried, Dost thou see the vise? If thou dost not be off, thou shalt be put into it again. When the bear saw that, he turned round and ran away. The tailor drove quietly to church, and the princess was married to him at once, and he lived with her as happy as a woodlark. Whosoever does not believe this must pay a thaler. End of story 114.
Story 115 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Kurt from Tucson, Arizona. Household Tales by Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm, and translated by Margaret Hunt. The bright sun brings it to light. A tailor's apprentice was traveling about the world in search of work, and at one time he could find none, and his poverty was so great that he had not a farthing to live on. Presently he met a Jew on the road, and he thought he would have a great deal of money about him. The tailor thrust God out of his heart, fell on the Jew, and said, "Give me thy money, or I will strike thee dead." Then said the Jew, "Grant me my life, I have no money but 8 farthings." But the tailor said, "Money thou hast, and it shall be produced," and used violence and beat him until he was near death. And when the Jew was dying, the last words he said were, "The bright sun will bring it to light," and thereupon he died. The tailor's apprentice felt in his pockets and sought for money, but he found nothing but 8 farthings, as the Jew had said. Then he took him up and carried him behind a clump of trees, and went onwards to seek work. After he had travelled about a long while, he got work in a town with a master who had a pretty daughter, with whom he fell in love, and he married her, and lived in good and happy wedlock. After a long time, when he and his wife had 2 children, the wife's father and mother died, and the young people kept house alone. One morning, when the husband was sitting on the table before the window, his wife brought him his coffee, and when he had poured it out into the saucer and was just going to drink, the sun shone on it, and the reflection gleamed hither and thither on the wall above, and made circles on it. Then the tailor looked up and said, "Yes, it would like very much to bring it to light, and cannot." The woman said, "Oh, dear husband, and what is that then? What dost thou mean by that?" He answered, "I must not tell thee." But she said, "If thou lovest me, thou must tell me," and used her most affectionate words, and said that no one should ever know it, and left him no rest. Then he told her how years ago, when he was travelling about seeking work, and quite worn out and penniless, he had killed a Jew, and that in the last agonies of death the Jew had spoken the words, "The bright sun will bring it to light." And now the sun had just wanted to bring it to light, and had gleamed and made circles on the wall, but had not been able to do it. After this he again charged her particularly never to tell this, or he would lose his life, and she did promise. When, however, he had sat down to work again, she went to her great friend and confided the story to her. But she was never to repeat it to any human being, but before 2 days were over, the whole town knew it, and the tailor was brought to trial and condemned. And thus, after all, the bright sun did bring it to light. End of story 115.
Story 116 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Melvin Lee. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The Blue Light. There was once on a time a soldier who for many years had served the king faithfully, but when the war came to an end, could serve no longer because of the many wounds which he had received. The king said to him, "Thou mayest return to thy home. I need thee no longer, and thou wilt not receive any more money, for he only receives wages who renders me service for them." Then the soldier did not know how to earn a living, went away greatly troubled, and walked the whole day, until in the evening he entered a forest. When darkness came on, he saw a light, which he went up to, and came to a house wherein lived a witch. "Do give me one night's lodging, and a little eat and drink," said he to her, "or I shall starve." "Oh," she answered, "who gives anything to a runaway soldier? Yet will I be compassionate, and take you in, if you will do what I wish." "What do you wish?" said the soldier. "That you should dig all round my garden for me tomorrow." The soldier consented, and next day labored with all his strength, but could not finish it by the evening. "I see well enough," said the witch, "that you can do no more today, but I will keep you yet another night, in payment for which you must tomorrow chop me a load of wood and make it small." The soldier spent the whole day in doing it, and in the evening the witch proposed that he should stay one night more. Tomorrow you shall only do me a very trifling piece of work. Behind my house there is an old dry well, into which my light has fallen. It burns blue, and never goes out, and you shall bring it up again for me." Next day the old woman took him to the well, and let him down in a basket. He found the blue light, and made her a signal to draw him up again. She did draw him up, but when he came near the edge, she stretched down her hand, and wanted to take the blue light away from him. "No," said he, perceiving her evil intention, "I will not give thee the light until I am standing with both feet upon the ground." The witch fell into a passion, let him down again into the well, and went away. The poor soldier fell without injury on the moist ground, and the blue light went on burning. But of what use was that to him? He saw very well that he could not escape death. He sat for a while very sorrowfully. Then suddenly he felt in his pocket, and found his tobacco pipe, which was still half full. "This shall be my last pleasure," thought he, pulled it out, lit it at the blue light, and began to smoke. When the smoke had circled about the cavern, suddenly a little black dwarf stood before him and said, "Lord, what are thy commands?" "What commands have I to give thee?" replied the soldier, quite astonished. "I must do everything thou biddest me," said the little man. "Good," said the soldier. "Then in the first place help me out of this well." The little man took him by the hand and led him through an underground passage, but he did not forget to take the blue light with him. On the way the dwarf showed him the treasures which the witch had collected and hidden there, and the soldier took as much gold as he could carry. When he was above, he said to the little man, "Now go and bind the old witch, and carry her before the judge." In a short time she, with frightful cries, came riding by as swift as the wind on a wild tomcat. Nor was it long after that before the little man reappeared. "It is all done," said he, "and the witch is already hanging on the gallows." "What further commands has my lord?" inquired the dwarf. "At this moment none," answered the soldier. "Thou canst return home, only be at hand immediately if I summon thee. Nothing more is needed than that thou shouldst light thy pipe at the blue light, and I will appear before thee at once." Thereupon he vanished from his sight. The soldier returned to the town from which he had come. He went to the best inn, ordered himself handsome clothes, and then bade the landlord furnish him a room as handsomely as possible. When it was ready, and the soldier had taken possession of it, he summoned the little black mannikin and said, "I have served the king faithfully, but he has dismissed me and left me to hunger, and now I want to take my revenge." "What am I to do?" asked the little man. "Late at night, when the king's daughter is in bed, bring her here in her sleep. She shall do servant's work for me." The mannikin said, "That is an easy thing for me to do, but a very dangerous thing for you, for if it is discovered, you will fare ill." When 12 o'clock had struck, the door sprang open, and the mannikin carried in the princess. "Ah, art thou there?" cried the soldier. "Get to thy work at once. Fetch the broom and sweep the chamber." When she had done this, he ordered her to come to his chair. Then he stretched out his feet and said, "Pull off my boots for me." And then he threw them in her face, and made her pick them up and clean and brighten them. She, however, did everything he bade her, without opposition, silently and with half-shut eyes. When the first cock crowed, the mannikin carried her back to the royal palace and laid her in her bed. Next morning, when the princess arose, she went to her father and told him that she had had a very strange dream. "I was carried through the streets with the rapidity of lightning," she said, "and taken into a soldier's room, and I had to wait upon him like a servant, sweep his room, clean his boots, and do all kinds of menial work. It was only a dream, and yet I am just as tired as if I really had done everything." "The dream may have been true," said the King. "I will give thee a piece of advice. Fill thy pocket full of peas, and make a small hole in it, and then, if thou art carried away again, they will fall out and leave a track in the streets." But unseen by the King, the mannikin was standing beside him when he said that, and heard all. At night, When the sleeping princess was again carried through the streets, some peas certainly did fall out of her pocket, but they made no track, for the crafty mannikin had just before scattered peas in every street there was. And again the princess was compelled to do servant's work until cock-crow. Next morning the king sent his people out to seek the track, but it was all in vain, for in every street poor children were sitting picking up peas and saying, "It must have rained peas last night." "We must think of something else," said the king. "Keep thy shoes on when thou goest to bed, and before thou comest back from the place where thou art taken, hide one of them there. I will soon contrive to find it." The black mannikin heard this plot, and at night, when the soldier again ordered him to bring the princess, revealed it to him, and told him that he knew of no expedient to counteract this stratagem, and if the shoe were found in the soldier's house, it would go badly with him. "Do what I bid thee," replied the soldier, and again this third night the princess was obliged to work like a servant. Before she went away, she hid her shoe under the bed. Next morning the king had the entire town searched for his daughter's shoe. It was found at the soldier's, and the soldier himself, who, at the entreaty of the dwarf, had gone outside the gate, was soon brought back and thrown into prison. In his flight he had forgotten the most valuable things he had, the blue light and the gold, and had only 1 ducat in his pocket. And now, loaded with chains, he was standing at the window of his dungeon, when he chanced to see one of his comrades passing by. The soldier tapped at the pane of glass, and when this man came up, said to him, "Be so kind as to fetch me the small bundle I have left lying in the inn, and I will give you a ducat for doing it." His comrade ran thither, and brought him what he wanted. As soon as the soldier was alone again, he lighted his pipe, and summoned the black mannikin. "Have no fear," said the latter to his master, "go wheresoever they take you, and let them do what they will, only take the blue light with you." Next day the soldier was tried, and though he had done nothing wicked, the judge condemned him to death. When he was led forth to die, he begged a last favour of the king. "What is it?" answered the king. "That I mayest smoke 1 more pipe on my way." "Thou mayest smoke 3," answered the king, "but do not imagine that I will spare thy life." Then the soldier pulled out his pipe, and lighted it at the blue light, and as soon as a few wreaths of smoke had ascended, the mannikin was there with a small cudgel in his hand, and said, "What does my lord command?" "Strike down to earth that false judge there, and his constable, and spare not the king, who has treated me so ill." Then the mannikin fell on them like lightning, darting this way and that, and whosoever was so much as touched by his cudgel fell to the earth, and did not venture to stir again. The king was terrified. He threw himself on the soldier's mercy, and merely to be allowed to live at all, gave him his kingdom for his own, and the princess to wife. End of story 116.
Story 117 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The Wilful Child. Once upon a time there was a child who was wilful, and would not do as her mother wished. For this reason God had no pleasure in her, and let her become ill. And no doctor could do her any good, and in a short time she lay on her death-bed. When she had been lowered into her grave, and the earth was spread over her, all at once her arm came out again, and stretched upwards. And when they had put it in, and spread fresh earth over it, it was all to no purpose, for the arm always came out again. Then the mother herself was obliged to go to the grave, and strike the arm with a rod. And when she had done that, it was drawn in, and then at last the child had rest beneath the ground. End of story 117.
Story 118 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Thomas Peter. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The Three Army Surgeons. 3 army surgeons who thought they knew their art perfectly were travelling about the world, and they came to an inn where they wanted to pass the night. The host asked whence they came, and whither they were going. "We are roaming about the world and practising our art. Just show me for once in a way what you can do," said the host. Then the first said he would cut off his hand, and put it on again early next morning. The second said he would tear out his heart, and replace it next morning. The third said he would cut out his eyes, and heal them again next morning. "If you can do that," said the innkeeper, "you have learnt everything." They, however, had a salve, with which they rubbed themselves, which joined parts together, and they carried the little bottle in which it was constantly with them. Then they cut the hand, heart, and eyes from their bodies as they had said they would, and laid them all together on a plate, and gave it to the innkeeper. The innkeeper gave it to a servant, who was to set it in the cupboard and take good care of it. The girl, however, had a lover in secret, who was a soldier. When, therefore, the innkeeper, the 3 army surgeons, and everyone else in the house were asleep, the soldier came and wanted something to eat. The girl opened the cupboard and brought him some food, and in her love forgot to shut the cupboard door again. She seated herself at the table by her lover, and they chattered away together. While she sat so contentedly there, thinking of no ill luck, the cat came creeping in, found the cupboard open, took the hand and heart and eyes of the 3 army surgeons, and ran off with them. When the soldier had done eating, and the girl was taking away the things and going to shut the cupboard, she saw that the plate which the innkeeper had given her to take care of was empty. Then she said in a fright to her lover, "Miserable girl, what shall I do? The hand is gone, the heart and the eyes are gone too. What will become of me in the morning?" "Be easy," said he. "I will help thee out of thy trouble. There is a thief hanging outside on the gallows. I will cut off his hand. Which hand was it?" "The right one." Then the girl gave him a sharp knife, and he went and cut the poor sinner's right hand off, and brought it to her. After this he caught the cat and cut its eyes out, and now nothing but the heart was wanting. "Have you not been killing, and are not the dead pigs in the cellar?" said he. "Yes," said the girl. "That's well," said the soldier, and he went down and fetched a pig's heart. The girl placed all together on the plate, and put it in the cupboard, and when after this her lover took leave of her, she went quietly to bed. In the morning, when the 3 army surgeons got up, they told the girl she was to bring them the plate on which the hand, heart, and eyes were lying. Then she brought it out of the cupboard, and the first fixed the thief's hand on and smeared it with his salve, and it grew to his arm directly. The second took the cat's eyes and put them in his own head. The third fixed the pig's heart firm in the place where his own had been, and the innkeeper stood by, admired their skill, and said he had never yet seen such a thing as that done, and would sing their praises and recommend them to everyone. Then they paid their bill and travelled farther. As they were on their way, the one with the pig's heart did not stay with them at all, but wherever there was a corner he ran to it, and rooted about in it with his nose as pigs do. The others wanted to hold him back by the tail of his coat, but that did no good. He tore himself loose, and ran wherever the dirt was thickest. The second also behaved very strangely. He rubbed his eyes, and said to the others, "Comrades, what is the matter? I don't see at all. Will one of you lead me, so that I do not fall?" Then with difficulty they travelled on till evening, when they reached another inn. They went into the bar together, and there at a table in the corner sat a rich man counting money. The one with the thief's hand walked round about him, made a sudden movement twice with his arm, and at last, when the stranger turned away, he snatched at the pile of money, and took a handful from it. One of them saw this, and said, "Comrade, what art thou about? Thou must not steal. Shame on thee!" "Eh?" said he, "but how can I stop myself? My hand twitches, and I am forced to snatch things whether I will or not." After this they lay down to sleep, and while they were lying there it was so dark that no one could see his own hand. All at once the one with the cat's eyes awoke, aroused the others, and said, "Brothers, just look up. Do you see the white mice running about there?" The two sat up, but could see nothing. Then said he, "Things are not right with us. We have not got back again what is ours. We must return to the innkeeper. He has deceived us." They went back, therefore, the next morning, and told the host they had not got what was their own again, that the first had a thief's hand, the second cat's eyes, and the third a pig's heart. The innkeeper said that the girl must be to blame for that, and was going to call her, but when she had seen the three coming, she had run out by the back door, and not come back. Then the three said he must give them a great deal of money, or they would set his house on fire. He gave them what he had, and whatever he could get together, and the three went away with it. It was enough for the rest of their lives, but they would rather have had their own proper organs. End of story 118. Story 119 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Thomas Peter. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The Seven Swabians. 7 Swabians were once together. The first was Master Schultz, the second Jakli, the third Marley, the fourth Jergli, the fifth Michael, the sixth Hans, the seventh Veitli. All 7 had made up their minds to travel about the world to seek adventures, and perform great deeds. But in order that they might go in security and with arms in their hands, they thought it would be advisable that they should have one solitary, but very strong and very long, spear made for them. This spear all 7 of them took in their hands at once. In front walked the boldest and bravest, and that was Master Schultz. All the others followed in a row, and Veitli was the last. Then it came to pass one day in the hay-making month, July, when they had walked a long distance, and still had a long way to go before they reached the village, where they were to pass the night, that as they were in a meadow in the twilight, a great beetle or hornet flew by them from behind a bush, and hummed in a menacing manner. Master Schultz was so terrified that he all but dropped the spear, and a cold perspiration broke out over his whole body. "Hark, hark!" cried he to his comrades. "Good heavens, I hear a drum!" Jakli, who was behind him holding the spear, and who perceived some kind of a smell, said, "Something is most certainly going on, for I taste powder and matches." At these words Master Schultz began to take to flight, and in a trice jumped over a hedge, but as he just happened to jump on to the teeth of a rake which had been left lying there after the haymaking, the handle of it struck against his face, and gave him a tremendous blow. "Oh dear, oh dear!" screamed Master Schultz. "Take me prisoner! I surrender! I surrender!" The other 6 all leapt over, one on the top of the other, crying, "If you surrender, I surrender too! If you surrender, I surrender too!" At length, as no enemy was there to bind and take them away, they saw that they had been mistaken, and in order that the story might not be known, and they be treated as fools and ridiculed, they all swore to each other to hold their peace about it until one of them accidentally spoke of it. Then they journeyed onwards. The second danger which they survived cannot be compared with the first. Some days afterwards their path led them through a fallow field, where a hare was sitting sleeping in the sun. Her ears were standing straight up, and her great glassy eyes were wide open. All of them were alarmed at the sight of the horrible wild beast, and they consulted together as to what it would be the least dangerous to do. For if they were to run away, they knew that the monster would pursue and swallow them whole. So they said, "We must go through a great and dangerous struggle. Boldly ventured is half won." And all 7 grasped the spear, Master Schultz in front and Veitli behind. And Master Schultz was always trying to keep the spear back, but Veitli had become quite brave while behind, and wanted to dash forward, and cried, "Strike home in every Swabian's name, or else I wish she may be lame." But Hans knew how to meet this, and said, "Thunder and lightning, it's fine to prate, but for dragon hunting thou'rt aye too late." Michael cried, "Nothing is wanting, not even a hair. Be sure the devil himself is there." Then it was Jergli's turn to speak. "If it be not, it's at least his mother, or else it's the devil's own step-brother." Now Marley had a bright thought, and said to Veitli, "Advance, Veitli, advance, advance, and I behind will hold the lance." Veitli, however, did not attend to that, and Jergli said, "'Tis Schultz's place the first to be. No one deserves that honour but he." Then Master Schultz plucked up his courage and said gravely, "Then let us boldly advance to the fight, and thus we shall show our valour and might." Hereupon they all together set on the dragon. Master Schultz crossed himself and prayed for God's assistance, but as all this was of no avail, and he was getting nearer and nearer to the enemy, he screamed, "Ho, ho! Oh, ho, 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 ho!" in the greatest anguish. This awakened the hare, which in great alarm darted swiftly away. When Master Schultz saw her thus flying from the field of battle, he cried in his joy, "Quick, Veitli, quick! Look there, look there! The monster's nothing but a hare!" But the Swabian allies went in search of further adventures, and came to the Moselle, a mossy, quiet, deep river, over which there are few bridges, and which in many places people have to cross in boats. As the 7 Swabians did not know this, they called to a man who was working on the opposite side of the river to know how people contrived to get across. The distance and the way of speaking made the man unable to understand what they wanted, and he said, "What? What?" in the way people speak in the neighbourhood of Treves. Master Schultz thought he was saying, "Wade through the water," and as he was the first, began to set out, and went into the Moselle. It was not long before he sank in the mud and the deep waves which drove against him, but his hat was blown on the opposite shore by the wind, and a frog sat down beside it and croaked, "What? What? What?" The other 6 on the opposite side heard that, and said, "Ho, ho, comrades! Master Schultz is calling us. If he can wade across, why cannot we?" So they all jumped into the water together in a great hurry, and were drowned. And thus one frog took the lives of all 6 of them, and not one of the Swabian allies ever reached home again. End of story 119. Story 120 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Thomas Peter. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The 3 Apprentices. There were once 3 apprentices who had agreed to keep always together while travelling, and always to work in the same town. At one time, however, their masters had no more work to give them, so that at last they were in rags, and had nothing to live on. Then one of them said, "What shall we do? We cannot stay here any longer. We will travel once more, and if we do not find any work in the town we go to, we will arrange with the innkeeper there that we are to write and tell him where we are staying, so that we can always have news of each other, and then we will separate." And that seemed best to the others also. They went forth, and met on the way a richly dressed man who asked who they were. "We are apprentices looking for work. Up to this time we have kept together, but if we cannot find anything to do, we are going to separate." "There is no need for that," said the man. If you will do what I tell you, you shall not want for gold or for work. Nay, you shall become great lords, and drive in your carriages. One of them said, If our souls and salvation be not endangered, we will certainly do it. They will not, replied the man. I have no claim on you. One of the others had, however, looked at his feet, and when he saw a horse's foot and a man's foot, he did not want to have anything to do with him. The devil, however, said, Be easy, I have no designs on you, but on another soul, which is half my own already, and whose measure shall be run full. As they were now secure, they consented, and the devil told them what he wanted. The first was to answer, All three of us, to every question. The second was to say, For money, and the third, And quite right, too. They were always to say this, one after the other, but they were not to say one word more, and if they disobeyed this order, all their money would disappear at once, but so long as they observed it, their pockets would always be full. As a beginning, he at once gave them as much as they could carry, and told them to go to such and such an inn when they got to the town. They went to it, and the innkeeper came to meet them, and asked if they wished for anything to eat. The first replied, All three of us. Yes, said the host, that is what I mean. The second said, For money. Of course, said the host. The third said, And quite right, too. Certainly it is right, said the host. Good meat and drink were now brought to them, and they were well waited on. After the dinner came the payment, and the innkeeper gave the bill to the one who said, All three of us. The second said, For money. And the third, And quite right, too. Indeed it is right, said the host. All three pay, and without money I can give nothing. They, however, paid still more than he had asked. The lodgers, who were looking on, said, These people must be mad. Yes, indeed they are, said the host. They are not very wise. So they stayed some time in the inn, and said nothing else but, All three of us, for money, and quite right, too. But they saw and knew all that was going on. It so happened that a great merchant came with a large sum of money, and said, Sir host, take care of my money for me. Here are 3 crazy apprentices who might steal it from me. The host did as he was asked. As he was carrying the trunk into his room, he felt that it was heavy with gold. Thereupon he gave the 3 apprentices a lodging below, but the merchant came upstairs into a separate apartment. When it was midnight, and the host thought that all were asleep, he came with his wife. They had an axe, and struck the rich merchant dead, and after they had murdered him, they went to bed again. When it was day, there was a great outcry. The merchant lay dead in bed, bathed in blood. All the guests ran at once, but the host said, The 3 crazy apprentices have done this. The lodgers confirmed it, and said, It can have been no one else. The innkeeper, however, had them called, and said to them, Have you killed the merchant? All 3 of us, said the first. For money, said the second, and the third added, And quite right, too. There now, you hear, said the host. They confess it themselves. They were taken to prison, therefore, and were to be tried. When they saw that things were going so seriously, they were after all afraid. But at night the devil came and said, Bear it just 1 day longer, and do not play away your luck. Not 1 hair of your head shall be hurt. The next morning they were led to the bar, and the judge said, Are you the murderers? All 3 of us. Why did you kill the merchant? For money. You wicked wretches, you have no horror of your sins? And quite right, too. They have confessed, and are still stubborn, said the judge. Lead them to death instantly. So they were taken out, and the host had to go with them into the circle. When they were taken hold of by the executioner's men, and were just going to be led up to the scaffold where the headsman was standing with naked sword, a coach drawn by 4 blood-red chestnut horses came up suddenly, driving so fast that fire flashed from the stones, and someone made signs from the window with a white handkerchief. Then said the headsman, It is a pardon coming, and "Pardon! Pardon!" was called from the carriage also. Then the devil stepped out as a very noble gentleman, beautifully dressed, and said, "You three are innocent. You may now speak. Make known what you have seen and heard." Then said the eldest, "We did not kill the merchant. The murderer is standing there in the circle." And he pointed to the innkeeper. "In proof of this, go into his cellar, where many others whom he has killed are still hanging." Then the judge sent the executioner's men thither, and they found it was as the apprentices said, and when they had informed the judge of this, he caused the innkeeper to be led up, and his head was cut off. Then said the devil to the three, "Now I have got the soul which I wanted to have, and you are free, and have money for the rest of your lives." End of story 120.
Story 121 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Melvin Lee. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The King's Son Who Feared Nothing. There once was a king's son who was no longer content to stay at home in his father's house, and as he had no fear of anything, he thought, "I will go forth into the wide world. There the time will not seem long to me, and I shall see wonders enough." So he took leave of his parents and went forth, and on from morning till night, and whichever way his path led, it was the same to him. It came to pass that he got to the house of a giant, and as he was so tired, he sat down by the door and rested. And as he let his eyes roam here and there, he saw the giant's playthings lying in the yard. These were a couple of enormous balls and ninepins, as tall as a man. After a while he had a fancy to set the ninepins up, and then rolled the balls at them, and screamed and cried out when the ninepins fell, and had a merry time of it. The giant heard the noise, stretched his head out of the window, and saw a man who was not taller than other men, and yet played with his ninepins. "Little worm," cried he, "why art thou playing with my balls? Who gave thee strength to do it?" The king's son looked up, saw the giant, and said, "O thou blockhead, thou thinkest indeed that thou only hast strong arms. I can do everything I want to do." The giant came down and watched the bowling with great admiration, and said, "Child of man, if thou art one of that kind, go and bring me an apple of the tree of life." "What dost thou want with it?" said the king's son. "I do not want the apple for myself," answered the giant, "but I have a betrothed bride who wishes for it. I have travelled far about the world and cannot find the tree." "I will soon find it," said the king's son, "and I do not know what is to prevent me from getting the apple down." The giant said, "Thou really believest it to be so easy? The garden in which the tree stands is surrounded by an iron railing, and in front of the railing lie wild beasts, each close to the other, and they keep watch and let no man go in." "They will be sure to let me in," said the king's son. "Yes, but even if thou dost get into the garden, and seest the apple hanging to the tree, it is still not thine. A ring hangs in front of it, through which anyone who wants to reach the apple and break it off must put his hand, and no one has yet had the luck to do it." "That luck will be mine," said the king's son. Then he took leave of the giant, and went forth over mountain and valley, and through plains and forests, until at length he came to the wondrous garden. The beasts lay round about it, but they had put their heads down and were asleep. Moreover, they did not awake when he went up to them. So he stepped over them, climbed the fence, and got safely into the garden. There in the very middle of it stood the tree of life, and the red apples were shining upon the branches. He climbed up the trunk to the top, and as he was about to reach out for an apple, he saw a ring hanging before it, but he thrust his hand through that without any difficulty, and gathered the apple. The ring closed tightly on his arm, and all at once he felt a prodigious strength flowing through his veins. When he had come down again from the tree with the apple, he would not climb over the fence, but grasped the great gate and had no need to shake it more than once before it sprang open with a loud crash. Then he went out, and the lion which had been lying down before was awake and sprang after him, not in rage and fierceness, but following him humbly as its master. The king's son took the giant the apple he had promised him, and said, "Seest thou, I have brought it without difficulty." The giant was glad that his desire had been so soon satisfied, hastened to his bride, and gave her the apple for which she had wished. She was a beautiful and wise maiden, and as she did not see the ring on his arm, she said, "I shall never believe that thou hast brought the apple until I see the ring on thine arm." The giant said, "I have nothing to do but go home and fetch it," and thought it would be easy to take away by force from the weak man what he would not give of his own free will. He therefore demanded the ring from him, but the king's son refused it. "Where the apple is, the ring must be also," said the giant. "If thou wilt not give it of thine own accord, thou must fight with me for it." They wrestled with each other for a long time, but the giant could not get the better of the king's son, who was strengthened by the magical power of the ring. Then the giant thought of a stratagem, and said, "I have got warm with fighting, and so hast thou. We will bathe in the river and cool ourselves before we begin again." The king's son, who knew nothing of falsehood, went with him to the water, and pulled off his clothes and the ring also from his arm, and sprang into the river. The giant instantly snatched the ring and ran away with it, but the lion, which had observed the theft, pursued the giant, tore the ring out of his hand, and brought it back to his master. Then the giant placed himself behind an oak tree, and while the king's son was busy putting on his clothes again, surprised him, and put both his eyes out. And now the unhappy king's son stood there, and was blind and knew not how to help himself. Then the giant came back to him, took him by the hand, as if he were someone who wanted to guide him, and led him to the top of a high rock. There he left him standing, and thought, "Just 2 steps more, and he will fall down and kill himself, and I can take the ring from him." But the faithful lion had not deserted its master. It held him fast by the clothes, and drew him gradually back again. When the giant came and wanted to rob the dead man, he saw that his cunning had been in vain. "Is there no way, then, of destroying a weak child of man like that?" said he angrily to himself, and seized the king's son, and led him back up to the precipice by another way. But the lion, which saw his evil design, helped its master out of danger here also. When they had got close to the edge, the giant let the blind man's hand drop, and was going to leave him behind alone. But the lion pushed the giant so that he was thrown down, and fell, dashed to pieces on the ground. The faithful animal again drew its master back from the precipice, and guided him to a tree by which flowed a clear brook. The king's son sat down there, but the lion lay down, and sprinkled the water in his face with its paws. Scarcely had a couple of drops wetted the sockets of his eyes, than he was once more able to see something, and remarked a little bird flying quite close by, which wounded itself against the trunk of a tree. On this it went down to the water, and bathed itself therein, and then it soared upwards, and swept between the trees without touching them, as if it had recovered its sight again. Then the king's son recognized a sign from God, and stooped down to the water, and washed and bathed his face in it, and when he arose, he had his eyes once more brighter and clearer than they had ever been. The king's son thanked God for his great mercy, and travelled with his lion onwards through the world. And it came to pass that he arrived before a castle which was enchanted. In the gateway stood a maiden of beautiful form and fine face, but she was quite black. She spoke to him and said, "Ah, if thou couldst but deliver me from the evil spell which is thrown over me." "What shall I do?" said the king's son. The maiden answered, "Thou must pass 3 nights in the great hall of this enchanted castle, but thou must let no fear enter thy heart. When they are doing their worst to torment thee, If thou bearest it without letting a sound escape thee, I shall be free. Thy life they dare not take." Then said the King's son, "I have no fear, with God's help I will try it." So he went gaily into the castle, and when it grew dark he seated himself in the large hall and waited. Everything was quiet, however, until midnight, when all at once a great tumult began, and out of every hole and corner came little devils. They behaved as if they did not see him, seated themselves in the middle of the room, lighted a fire, and began to gamble. When one of them lost, he said, "It is not right. Someone is here who does not belong to us. It is his fault that I am losing." "Wait, you fellow behind the stove, I am coming," said another. The screaming became still louder, so that no one could have heard it without terror. The King's son stayed sitting quite quietly, and was not afraid, but at last the devils jumped up from the ground and fell on him, and there were so many of them that he could not defend himself from them. They dragged him about on the floor, pinched him, pricked him, beat him, and tormented him, but no sound escaped from him. Towards morning they disappeared, and he was so exhausted that he could scarcely move his limbs. But when day dawned, the black maiden came to him. She bore in her hand a little bottle, wherein was the water of life, wherewith she washed him, and he at once felt all pain depart, and new strength flow through his veins. She said, "Thou hast held out successfully for one night, but 2 more lie before thee." Then she went away again, and as she was going, he observed that her feet had become white. The next night the devils came out and began their gambols anew. They fell on the King's son, and beat him much worse severely than the night before, until his body was covered with wounds. But as he bore it all quietly, they were forced to leave him, and when dawn appeared, the maiden came and healed him with the water of life. And when she went away, he saw with joy that she had already become white to the tips of her fingers, and now he had only 1 night more to go through. But it was the worst. The hobgoblins came again. "Art thou there still?" cried they. "Thou shalt be tormented till thy breath stops." They pricked him and beat him, and threw him here and there, and pulled him by the arms and legs as if they wanted to tear him to pieces. But he bore everything, and never uttered a cry. At last the devils vanished, but he lay fainting there, and did not stir, nor could he raise his eyes to look at the maiden who came in, and sprinkled and bathed him with the water of life. But suddenly he was freed from all pain, and felt fresh and healthy, as if he had awakened from sleep. And when he opened his eyes, he saw the maiden standing by him, snow white and fair as day. "Rise," said she, "and swing thy sword 3 times over the stairs, and then all will be delivered." And when he had done that, the whole castle was released from enchantment, and the maiden was a rich king's daughter. The servants came and said that the table was already set in the great hall, and dinner served up. Then they sat down and ate and drank together, and in the evening the wedding was solemnized with great rejoicings. End of story 121. Story 122 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Melvin Lee. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. Donkey Cabbages. There was once a young huntsman who went into the forest to lie in wait. He had a fresh and joyous heart, and as he was going thither, whistling upon a leaf, an ugly old crone came up, who spoke to him and said, "Good day, dear huntsman. Truly you are merry and contented, but I am suffering from hunger and thirst. Do give me an alms." The huntsman had compassion on the poor old creature, felt in his pocket, and gave her what he could afford. He was then about to go further, but the old woman stopped him and said, "Listen, dear huntsman, to what I tell you. I will make you a present in return for your kindness. Go on your way now, but in a little while you will come to a tree, whereon 9 birds are sitting, which have a cloak in their claws, and are plucking at it. Take your gun and shoot into the midst of them. They will let the cloak fall down to you, but one of the birds will be hurt, and will drop down dead. Carry away the cloak. It is a wishing cloak. When you throw it over your shoulders, you only have to wish to be in a certain place, and you will be there in the twinkling of an eye. Take out the heart of the dead bird and swallow it whole, and every morning early when you get up, you will find a gold piece under your pillow." The huntsman thanked the wise woman, and thought to himself, "Those are fine things that she has promised me, if all does but come true." And verily, when he had walked about 100 paces, he heard in the branches above him such a screaming and twittering that he looked up and saw there a crowd of birds, who were tearing a piece of cloth about with their beaks and claws, and tugging and fighting as if each wanted to have it all to himself. "Well," said the huntsman, "this is wonderful. It has really come to pass just as the old wife foretold." And he took the gun from his shoulder, aimed and fired it right into the midst of them, so that the feathers flew about. The birds instantly took to flight with loud outcries, but one dropped down dead, and the cloak fell at the same time. Then the huntsman did as the old woman had directed him, cut open the bird, sought the heart, swallowed it down, and took the cloak home with him. Next morning when he awoke, the promise occurred to him, and he wished to see if it also had been fulfilled. When he lifted up the pillow, the gold piece shone in his eyes, and the next day he found another, and so it went on every time he got up. He gathered together a heap of gold, but at the last moment he thought, "Of what use is all my gold to me if I stay at home? I will go forth and see the world." He then took leave of his parents, buckled on his huntsman's pouch and gun, and went out into the world. It came to pass that one day he travelled through a dense forest, and when he came to the end of it, in the plain before him stood a fine castle. An old woman was standing with a wonderfully beautiful maiden, looking out of one of the windows. The old woman, however, was a witch, and said to the maiden, "There comes one out of the forest who has a wonderful treasure in his body. We must filch it from him, my dear daughter. It is more suitable for us than for him. He has a bird's heart about him, by means of which a gold piece lies every morning under his pillow." She told her what she was to do to get it, and what part she had to play, and finally threatened her, and said with angry eyes, "And if you do not attend to what I say, it will be worse for you." Now when the huntsman came nearer, he descried the maiden, and said to himself, "I have travelled about for such a long time, I will take a rest for once, and enter that beautiful castle. I have certainly money enough." Nevertheless, the real reason was that he had caught sight of the pretty girl. He entered the house, and was well received and courteously entertained. Before long he was so much in love with the young witch that he no longer thought of anything else, and only saw things as she saw them, and did what she desired. The old woman then said, "Now we must have the bird's heart, he will never miss it." She prepared a drink, and when it was ready, poured it into a cup and gave it to the maiden, who was to present it to the huntsman. She did so, saying, "Now, my dearest, drink to me." So he took the cup, and when he had swallowed the draught, he brought up the heart of the bird. The girl had to take it away secretly, and swallow it herself, for the old woman would have it so. Thenceforward he found no more gold under his pillow, but it lay instead under that of the maiden, from whence the old woman fetched it away every morning. But he was so much in love and so befooled that he thought of nothing else but of passing his time with the girl. Then the old witch said, "We have the bird's heart, but we must also take the wishing cloak away from him." The girl answered, "We will leave him that. he has lost his wealth." The old woman was angry and said, "Such a mantle is a wonderful thing, and is seldom to be found in this world. I must and will have it." She gave the girl several blows, and said that if she did not obey, it should fare ill with her. So she did the old woman's bidding, placed herself at the window, and looked on the distant country, as if she were very sorrowful. The huntsman asked, "Why dost thou stand there so sorrowfully?" "Ah, my beloved," was her answer, "over yonder lies the Garnet Mountain, where the precious stones grow. I long for them so much that when I think of them I feel quite sad. But who can get them? Only the birds. They fly and can reach them, but a man never." "Hast thou nothing else to complain of?" said the huntsman. "I will soon remove that burden from thy heart." With that he drew her under his mantle, wished himself on the Garnet Mountain, and in the twinkling of an eye they were sitting on it together. Precious stones were glistening on every side, so that it was a joy to see them, and together they gathered the finest and the costliest of them. Now the old woman had, through her sorceries, contrived that the eyes of the huntsman should become heavy. He said to the maiden, "We will sit down and rest a while. I am so tired that I can no longer stand on my feet." Then they sat down, and he laid his head in her lap and fell asleep. When he was asleep, she unfastened the mantle from his shoulders and wrapped herself in it, picked up the garnets and stones, and wished herself back at home with them. But when the huntsman had had his sleep out, and awoke, and perceived that his sweetheart had betrayed him, and left him alone on the wild mountain, he said, "Oh, what treachery there is in the world!" and sat down there in care and sorrow, not knowing what to do. But the mountain belonged to some wild and monstrous giants, who dwelt thereon and lived their lives there, and he had not sat long before he saw 3 of them coming towards him. So he lay down as if he were sunk in a deep sleep. Then the giants came up, and the first kicked him with his foot, and said, "What sort of an earthworm is lying curled up here?" The second said, "Step upon him and kill him." But the third said, "That would indeed be worth your while. Just let him live, he cannot remain here, and when he climbs higher toward the summit of the mountain, the clouds will lay hold of him and bear him away." So saying, they passed by, but the huntsman had paid heed to their words, and as soon as they were gone, he rose and climbed up the summit of the mountain, and when he had sat there a while, a cloud floated towards him, caught him up, carried him away, and travelled about for a long time in the heavens. Then it sank lower, and let itself down on a great cabbage garden, girt around by walls, so that he came softly to the ground on cabbages and vegetables. Then the huntsman looked about him and said, "If I had but something to eat! I am so hungry, and my hunger will increase in course of time. But I see here neither apples nor pears, nor any sort of fruit, everywhere nothing but cabbages." But at length he thought, "At a pinch I can eat some of the leaves. They do not taste particularly good, but they will refresh me." With that he picked himself out a fine head of cabbage, and ate it, but scarcely had he swallowed a couple of mouthfuls, than he felt very strange and quite different. 4 legs grew on him, a large head and 2 thick ears, and he saw with horror that he was changed into an ass. Still, as his hunger increased every minute, and as the juicy leaves were suitable to his present nature, he went on eating with great zest. At last he arrived at a different kind of cabbage, but as soon as he had swallowed it, he again felt a change, and reassumed his former human shape. Then the huntsman lay down and slept off his fatigue. When he awoke next morning, he broke off 1 head of the bad cabbages, and another of the good ones, and thought to himself, This shall help me to get my own again, and punish treachery." When he took the cabbages with him, climbed over the wall, and went forth to seek for the castle of his sweetheart. After wandering about for a couple of days, he was lucky enough to find it again. He dyed his face brown, so that his own mother would not have known him, and begged for shelter. "I am so tired," he said, "that I can go no further." The witch asked, "Who are you, countryman, and what is your business?" "I am a king's messenger, and was sent out to seek the most delicious salad which grows beneath the sun. I have even been so fortunate as to find it, and am carrying it about with me, but the heat of the sun is so intense that the delicate cabbage threatens to wither, and I do not know if I can carry it any further." When the old woman heard of the exquisite salad, she was greedy and said, "Dear countryman, let me just taste this wonderful salad." "Why not?" answered he. "I have brought 2 heads with me, and will give you one of them." And he opened his pouch and handed her the bad cabbage. The witch suspected nothing amiss, and her mouth watered so for this new dish that she herself went into the kitchen and dressed it. When it was prepared, she could not wait until it was set on the table, but took a couple of leaves at once, and put them in her mouth, but hardly had she swallowed them than she was deprived of her human shape, and she ran out into the courtyard in the form of an ass. Presently the maidservant entered the kitchen, saw the salad standing there ready prepared, and was about to carry it up, but on the way, according to habit, she was seized by the desire to taste, and she ate a couple of leaves. Instantly the magic power showed itself, and she likewise became an ass, and ran out to the old woman, and the dish of salad fell to the ground. Meantime the messenger sat beside the beautiful girl, and as no one came with the salad, and she also was longing for it, she said, "I don't know what has become of the salad." The huntsman thought the salad must have already taken effect, and said, "I will go to the kitchen and inquire about it." As he went down, he saw the 2 asses running about in the courtyard. The salad, however, was lying on the ground. "All right," said he, "the 2 have taken their portion," and he picked up the other leaves and laid them on the dish, and carried them to the maiden. "I bring you the delicate food myself," said he, "in order that you may not have to wait longer." Then she ate of it, and was, like the others, immediately deprived of her human form, and ran out into the courtyard in the shape of an ass. After the huntsman had washed his face, so that the transformed ones could recognize him, he went down into the courtyard and said, "Now you shall receive the wages of your treachery," and bound them together, all 3 with one rope, and drove them along until he came to a mill. He knocked at the window. The miller put out his head and asked what he wanted. "I have 3 unmanageable beasts," answered he, "which I don't want to keep any longer. Will you take them in and give them food and stable room, and manage them as I tell you? And then I will pay you what you ask." The miller said, "Why not? But how am I to manage them?" The huntsman then said that he was to give 3 beatings and 1 meal daily to the old donkey, that was the witch, 1 beating and 3 meals to the younger one, which was the servant girl, and to the youngest, which was the maiden, no beatings and 3 meals, for he could not bring himself to have the maiden beaten. After that he went back into the castle, and found therein everything he needed. After a couple of days the miller came and said he must inform him that the old ass, which had received 3 beatings and only 1 meal daily, was dead. The 2 others, he continued, are certainly not dead, but are fed 3 times daily, but they are so sad that they cannot last much longer. The huntsman was moved to pity, put away his anger, and told the miller to drive them back again to him, and when they came, he gave them some of the good salad, so that they became human again. The beautiful girl fell on her knees before him and said, "Ah, my beloved, forgive me for the evil I have done you. My mother drove me to it. It was done against my will, for I love you dearly. Your wishing cloak hangs in a cupboard, and as for the bird's heart, I will take a vomiting potion." But he thought otherwise and said, "Keep it, it is all the same, for I will take thee for my wife." So the wedding was celebrated, and they lived happily together until their death. End of story 122.
Story number 123 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by April 6090, California, United States of America. Household Tales by Jacob and William Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The Old Woman in the Wood. A poor servant girl was once traveling with a family with which she was in service, through a great forest, and when they were in the midst of it, robbers came out of the thicket and murdered all they found. All perished together except the girl, who had jumped out of the carriage in a fright and hidden herself behind a tree. When the robbers had gone away with their booty, she came out and beheld the great disaster. Then she began to weep bitterly and said, "What can a poor girl like me do now? I do not know how to get out of the forest. No human being lives in it, so I must certainly starve." She walked about and looked for a road, but could find none. When it was evening, she seated herself under a tree, gave herself into God's keeping, and resolved to sit waiting there and not go away, let what might happen. When, however, she had sat there for a while, a white dove came flying to her with a little golden key in its mouth. It put the little key into her hand and said, "Doubt'st thou see that great tree? Therein is a little lock. It opens with the tiny key, and there thou wilt find food enough, and suffer no more hunger." Then she went to the tree and opened it, and found milk in a little dish, and white bread to break into it, so that she could eat her fill. When she was satisfied, she said, "It is now the time when the hens at home go to roost. I am so tired I could go to bed too." Then the dove flew to her again, and brought another golden key in its bill, and said, "Open that tree there, and thou wilt find a bed." So she opened it, and found a beautiful white bed, and prayed God to protect her during the night, and lay down and slept. In the morning the dove came for the third time, and again brought a little key, and said, "Open that tree there, and thou wilt find clothes." And when she opened it, she found garments beset with gold and with jewels, more splendid than those of any king's daughter. So she lived there for some time, and the dove came every day and provided her with all she needed, and it was a quiet, good life. Once, however, the dove came and said, "Wilt thou do something for my sake?" "With all my heart," said the girl. Then said the little dove, "I will guide thee to a small house. Enter it, and inside it an old woman will be sitting by the fire, and will say, 'Good day.' But on thy life give her no answer. Let her do what she will, but pass by her on the right side. Further on there is a door, which open, and thou wilt enter into a room where a quantity of rings of all kinds are lying, amongst which are some magnificent ones with shining stones. Leave them, however, where they are, and seek out a plain one, which must likewise be amongst them, and bring it here to me as quickly as thou canst." The girl went to the little house and came to the door. There sat an old woman who stared when she saw her and said, "Good day, my child." The girl gave her no answer and opened the door. "Whither away?" cried the old woman, and seized her by the gown, and wanted to hold to her fast, saying, "That is my house. No one can go in there if I choose not to allow it." But the girl was silent and got away from her, and went straight into the room. Now there lay on the table an enormous quantity of rings, which gleamed and glittered before her eyes. She turned them over and looked for the plain one, but could not find it. While she was seeking, she saw the old woman and how she was stealing away, and wanting to get off with a bird cage, which she had in her hand. So she went after her and took the cage out of her hand, and when she raised it up and looked into it, a bird was inside which had the plain ring in its bill. Then she took the ring, and ran quite joyously home with it, and thought the little white dove would come and get the ring, but it did not. Then she leaned against a tree and determined to wait for the dove, and as thus stood, it seemed just as if the tree was soft and pliant, and was letting its branches down, and suddenly the branches twined around her, and were 2 arms, and when she looked round, the tree was a handsome man, who embraced and kissed her heartily, and said, "Thou hast delivered me from the power of the old woman, who is a wicked witch. She had changed me into a tree, and every day for 2 hours I was a white dove, and as long as she possessed the ring I could not regain my human form." Then his servants and his horses, who had likewise been changed into trees, were freed from the enchantment also, and stood beside him. And he led them forth to his kingdom, for he was a king's son, and they married, and lived happily. End of story number 123.
Story 124 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Hannah Parrott. Household Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The 3 Brothers. There was once a man who had 3 sons, and nothing else in the world but the house in which he lived. Now each of the sons wished to have the house after his father's death, but the father loved them all alike and did not know what to do. He did not wish to sell the house, because it had belonged to his forefathers, else he might have divided the money amongst them. At last a plan came into his head, and he said to his sons, "Go into the world, and try each of you to learn a trade, and, when you all come back, he who makes the best masterpiece shall have the house." The sons were well content with this, and the eldest determined to be a blacksmith, the second a barber, and the third a fencing master. They fixed a time when they should all come home again, and then each went his way. It chanced that they all found skilful masters, who taught them their trades well. The blacksmith had to shoe the king's horses, and he thought to himself, "The house is mine, without doubt." The barber only shaved great people, and he too already looked upon the house as his own. The fencing master got many a blow, but he only bit his lip and let nothing vex him, for, said he to himself, "If you are afraid of a blow, you'll never win the house." When the appointed time had gone by, the 3 brothers came back home to their father, but they did not know how to find the best opportunity for sharing their skill, so they sat down and consulted together. As they were sitting thus, all at once a hare came running across the field. "Aha! Just in time," said the barber. So he took his basin and soap, and lathered away until the hare came up. Then he soaped and shaved off the hare's whiskers whilst he was running at the top of his speed, and did not even cut his skin or injure a hair on his body. "Well done," said the old man. "Your brothers will have to exert themselves wonderfully, or the house will be yours." Soon after, up came a nobleman in his coach, dashing along at full speed. "Now you shall see what I can do, father," said the blacksmith. So away he ran after the coach, took all 4 shoes off the feet of one of the horses whilst he was galloping, and put him on 4 new shoes without stopping him. "You are a fine fellow, and as clever as your brother," said his father. "I do not know to which I ought to give the house." Then the 3rd son said, "Father, let me have my turn, if you please," and, as it was beginning to rain, he drew his sword and flourished it backwards and forwards above his head so fast that not a drop fell upon him. It rained still harder and harder, till at last it came down in torrents, but he only flourished his sword faster and faster, and remained as dry as if he was sitting in a house. When his father saw this he was amazed, and said, "This is the masterpiece, the house is yours." His brothers were satisfied with this, as was agreed beforehand, and as they loved one another very much, they all 3 stayed together in the house, followed their trades, and, as they had learnt them so well and were so clever, they earned a great deal of money. Thus they lived together happily until they grew old, and at last, when one of them fell sick and died, the two others grieved so sorely about it that they also fell ill, and soon after died. And because they had been so clever, and had loved one another so much, they were all laid in the same grave. End of story 124.
Story number 125 of Household Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by April 6090, California, United States of America. Household Tales by Jacob and William Grimm. Translated by Margaret Hunt. The Devil and his Grandmother. There was a great war, and the king had many soldiers, but gave them small pay, so small that they could not live upon it. So 3 of them agreed among themselves to desert. One of them said to the others, "If we are caught, we shall be hanged on the gallows. How shall we manage it?" Another said, "Look at the great cornfield. If we were to hide ourselves there, no one could find us. The troops are not allowed to enter it, and tomorrow they are to march away." They crept into the corn, only the troops did not march away, but remained lying all round about it. They stayed in the corn for 2 days and 2 nights, and were so hungry that they all but died. But if they had come out, their death would have been certain. Then said they, "What is the use of our deserting if we have to perish miserably here?" But now a fiery dragon came flying through the air, and it came down to them, and asked why they had concealed themselves there. They answered, "We are 3 soldiers who have deserted because the pay was so bad, and now we shall have to die of hunger if we stay here, or to dangle on the gallows if we go out." "If you will serve me for 7 years," said the dragon, "I will convey you through the army, so that no one shall seize you." "We have no choice, and are compelled to accept," they replied. Then the dragon caught hold of them with his claws, and carried them away through the air over the army, and put them down again on the earth far from it. But the dragon was no other than the devil. He gave them a small whip, and said, "Whip with it and crack it. Then as much gold will spring up round about as you can wish for. Then you can live like great lords, keep horses, and drive your carriages. But when the 7 years have come to an end, you are my property." Then he put before them a book, which they were all 3 forced to sign. "I will, however, then set you a riddle," said he, "and if you can guess that, you shall be free, and released from my power." Then the dragon flew away from them, and then they went away with their whip, had gold in plenty, and ordered themselves rich apparel, and travelled about the world. Wherever they were, they lived in pleasure and magnificence, rode on horseback, drove in carriages, ate and drank, but did nothing wicked. The time slipped quickly away, and when the 7 years were coming to an end, 2 of them were terribly anxious and alarmed. But the 3rd took the affair easily, and said, "Brothers, fear nothing. My head is sharp enough. I shall guess the riddle." They went out into the open country and sat down, and the 2 pulled sorrowful faces. Then an aged woman came up to them, who inquired why they were so sad. "Alas!" said they, "how can that concern you? After all, you cannot help us." "Who knows," said she, "confide your trouble to me." So they told her that they had been the devil's servants for nearly 7 years, and that he had provided them with gold as plentifully as if it had been blackberries, but that they had sold themselves to him, and were forfeited to him if at the end of 7 years they could not guess a riddle. The old woman said, "If you are to be saved, one of you must go into the forest. There he will come to a fallen rock, which looks like a little house. He must enter that, and then he will obtain help." The 2 melancholy ones thought to themselves, "That will still not save us," and stayed where they were. But the 3rd, the merry one, got up and walked on in the forest until he found the rock house. In the little house, however, a very aged woman was sitting, who was the devil's grandmother, and asked the soldier where he came from, and what he wanted there. He told her everything that had happened, and as he pleased her well, she had pity on him, and said she would help him. She lifted up a great stone which lay above a cellar, and said, "Conceal thyself there. Thou canst hear everything that is said here. Only sit still and do not stir. When the dragon comes, I will question him about the riddle. He tells everything to me, so listen carefully to his answer." At 12 o'clock at night the dragon came flying thither, and asked for his dinner. The grandmother laid the table, and served up food and drink, so that he was pleased, and they ate and drank together. In the course of conversation she asked him what kind of a day he had had, and how many souls he had got. "Nothing went very well to-day," he answered, "but I have laid hold of 3 soldiers. I have them safe." "Indeed, 3 soldiers? That's something like! But they may escape you yet." The devil said mockingly, "They are mine. I will set them a riddle which they will never in this world be able to guess." "What riddle is that?" she inquired. "I will tell you. In the great North Sea lies a dead dog fish. That shall be your roast meat, and the rib of a whale shall be your silver spoon, and a hollow old horse's hoof shall be your wine-glass." When the devil had gone to bed, the old grandmother raised up the stone and let out the soldier. "Hast thou paid particular attention to everything?" "Yes," he said, "I know enough, and will contrive to save myself." Then he had to go back another way through the window, secretly and with all speed, to his companions. He told them how the devil had been overreached by the old grandmother, and how he had learned the answer to the riddle from him. Then they were all joyous and of good cheer, and took the whip and whipped so much gold for themselves that it ran all over the ground. When the 7 years had fully gone by, the devil came with a book, showed the signatures, and said, "I will take you with me to hell. There you shall have a meal. If you can guess what kind of roast meat you will have to eat, you shall be free and released from your bargain, and may keep the whip as well." Then the first soldier began, and said, "In the great North Sea lies a dead dog-fish. That no doubt is the roast meat." The devil was angry and began to mutter, "Hm, hm, hm," and asked the second, "But what will your spoon be?" "The rib of a whale. That is to be our silver spoon." The devil made a wry face again, and growled, "Hm, hm, hm," and said to the third, "And do you also know what your wine-glass is to be?" "An old horse's hoof is to be our wine-glass." Then the devil flew away with a loud cry, and had no more power over them. But the 3 kept the whip, whipped as much money for themselves with it as they wanted, and lived happily to their end. End of story number 125.